deep stuff about like trust and mistakes causing people to lose their faith in you and lose their trust in you. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Orphic. My name is Alyssa. I'm an astrophysicist. I have my PhD, and I do research on the intersection of science and spirituality, trying to understand how the entire universe works. So please give me a follow on Instagram at interdimensional.astrophysics. Hey.
Hey, I'm Mikayla at Mariposa Moonchild on Instagram, so please give me a follow there. Part of my work is being part of the ripple effect of healing that's happening across the planet right now. So with that, I work with energy medicine and shadow alchemy and have a one-on-one program. So yeah, go over and check me out on Instagram and connect with me there.
Awesome. All right. We like to start every episode by doing some grounding in and just taking some breaths to be present. So Mikayla will lead us off with that. Let's do it.
Yeah, so just take a moment and close our eyes. I invite you to close your eyes. We're going to take a few deep cleansing breaths here. Let's take a deep breath in, filling our lungs all the way to the top. Pausing at the top. And letting it go. Let's do another deep breath like that. Filling your lungs all the way up, 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 up. Even when you can't feel like you can't sit anymore, sip even more in. Hold. Feel your heart beating in your chest. Hold, hold. And open the mouth and let it go. Another deep breath in. Filling your lungs all the way up. Up, 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 up. Pausing at the top. And release. Let it go. And slowly and gently just bring yourself back into this space.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, this episode is about tapping, and I tell a story about tapping that I did on my own issues with past mistakes. And I think this episode is very enlightening and really deep and good. So definitely hope you enjoy that. And if you've never heard of tapping, it's a very powerful modality to kind of release and move energy in your body. So I just also want to mention, don't forget that all of these episodes are on YouTube, so subscribe to our YouTube, and also leave us a review, podcast review on Spotify or Apple if you've been enjoying this, and tell a friend. So enjoy this episode, and thanks for being here. Yeah, I've been good. I remembered that I wanted to maybe talk about, I wanted, speaking of resistance and triggers and stuff, I wanted to talk about this thing that I tapped through, my whole tapping thing.
Yeah.
Because I thought that was important. Yeah. So I had a trigger come up that a few weeks ago, and it was about all about how I talked about recently with dropping cannabis as a frequent substance use in my life, and how everything has.
That was a couple episodes ago. If you want to go listen to that.
Yeah, it was in episode 48.
Well, we talked about it more intently a few episodes ago, but we've been talking about it probably throughout the seasons or whatever.
Yeah. And so part of that was the shift that happened there is showing up more. And I've been showing up in tutoring, and but like there's this contrast for me, because since I haven't shown up to anything, okay, no, that's not true. Sorry, I don't want to say that. That was like not what I meant to say. Since I haven't put myself in a position to be like of working for someone else, or like really in I think it really has to do with the frequency of the energy exchange, all about the energy exchange frequency, because or especially like working for someone else, anytime you're opening yourself up to criticism, and this is the thing, like so many things in life, every situation in life,
speak to this too.
Yeah, can open you up to criticism or feedback, not even criticism, just feedback. But when you're a highly sensitive person like us, and I think a lot of people are really in that boat, there's a lot of people that really don't do well with feedback. And so I had this trigger that it was, I'm working with a few like middleman companies for my tutoring stuff. And sometimes they'll like, one of the people will like send me, like either I'll be in a group chat with them and the parent or something of the tutoring, or sometimes they'll like send me a really detailed text or something. And what's crazy about this one text of feedback that was triggering to me, that influenced this whole tapping thing that I did, which was about my mistakes from the past, and yeah, all about that stuff. I never even worked with that person again. Like I never even tutored them again, because they just never followed. Like I don't think it had anything to do with like me, like, because it was an extremely small criticism. I think it was just maybe like a one and whatever situation. So this so the specific thing was, I don't know, it was just this text that had like maybe like one thing a problem that I did wrong at first because I read it wrong, and the mom in the text, I was in a group chat with the middleman person and the mom, and the first part of the feedback text, when the middleman person's like, how did it go? And this mom was like,
so you were tutoring like her son, who is like in like what, high school?
Yeah, it was high school. It was like high school geometry. And she like picked apart like the first line of the text was, the tutor gave him the wrong answer for a question that they did for about 5 to 7 minutes. So she's breaking down, it was a 2-hour session. She's breaking this down into by the minute.
It's like, was she in the room with him, do you think?
She said that she was around, I think so. I think she was at first, actually. But I don't know, because he didn't even
how did she know it was 5 to 7 minutes?
This was on Zoom, and this is where the kid didn't turn his camera on Zoom. So I did this geometry.
Well, yeah, that's another piece of this.
Yeah, that was weird. Like, yeah, so it was fine, and I tutored him for 2 hours, and I think she had to leave towards the end. But anyway, this feedback text, because, you know, the middleman person is, of course, you want to make sure, whatever, get feedback, see if they want to continue, see if they need another session, whatever. Sometimes it's like we establish a weekly thing. Sometimes it's like case by case basis. Anyway, the first part of the text was, the tutor gave him, and I'm in the chat too. She says the tutor, I'm like right there in the chat. The tutor gave him the wrong answer for a problem they worked on for about 5 to, she said it's something before that too, like it started out like there were just a few road bumps in the beginning, something like that. Anyway, so this like, and this was also on the heels of like some other feedback earlier in the week, which was just, when you're just starting with people, whatever. So this triggered me a lot, but more than was, but it was to be expected, because this was the first time that I was putting myself in a position to receive feedback, because for the whole year before that, I was mainly just working on the podcast, working on like my own research. I was actually like this whole past year, I was also like a research advisor to these 2 high school girls, and I guided them through this whole project. So obviously tons of other things that I'm working on, but nothing had put me in a position to receive any feedback or criticism until that week. And it came in hot, and it came in like a big lesson. So this thing, so I get that text, and like immediately like my whole body is reacting, and my whole, like, I want to crawl inside a hole, and I want to say, should I just stop? Like, should I just give up? Like, I don't know how to deal with these people. Like, I don't know. It just gives you that whole full body, like icky feeling, like, like, oh my God, like I shouldn't have, like, I don't know, like I should have prepared for more, like maybe I shouldn't be doing this, like I'm kind of refreshing all of my memory of this stuff on the fly, but I know I have the knowledge to do it all. And honestly, high school geometry is pretty easy, but so like just all these things flooding in, and I was getting emotional. Like I was sending my cousin like a 5-minute voice memo, and I like started crying in the voice memo, and I was like, oh my God, I was like, so much is wanting to come out right now. And I felt called to do tapping on it, and I leaned into it. And instead of going to spin class with like tears in my eyes, I was like, and so this was like on a Friday morning, I was like, you know what? Like clearly a lot of emotions are coming up. I feel like I have a lot to say. I feel like tapping is a good thing to do. And I'll go over again. Like I was telling my friend about this, and I think she wasn't very familiar like with the tapping process. Like tapping is a really good thing to do, like especially if you feel like you need to vent or kind of say things, if you have things to say. So the tapping process that I learned this initially like from my cousin, and I know you have seen, there's like a lot of guided things online or whatever, but the general process is going through the tapping points. You know, you have your hand, and then you go up to the head, and there's all these different points in the head and your shoulders and stuff like that. And you start off with a phrase that is kind of like affirming your self-love, but you're tapping, what you're doing is you're tapping on an issue, like on a problem, on something that's bothering you, right? And so you can say something like, even though insert problem here, I completely love and accept myself. And so for mine, it was what it was bringing up was like my mistakes of the past, like all of my mistakes, like I make mistakes. Nobody can trust me because I make mistakes is what it was bringing up for me. And so I said, even though I've made mistakes in the past, I completely love and accept myself. And so you go through, and then you tap on all the points, and you say out loud, you talk out loud the issue, like what's bothering you, and also like how you feel about it. So you talk out how you feel about the issue, and you just get everything out, and it tends to bring up a lot of subconscious things that you're not aware of, or it tends to, you just go deeper. And the whole thing is that while you're tapping, like it's soothing your you're doing a lot, you're moving energy, but it's like soothing your nervous system. It's like there's like a safety nervous system mechanism that's engaged there.
There are also specific points, like they are like acupressure points. Yeah, they are specific points. They're not just like random parts of your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. There's specific points. I don't know the science to it. There is a science to it. And then after you feel like you've said all that you need to say about the issue, then you switch it to a positive current, into a more encouraging, like, but I know, like things like, but I've been doing really well lately, or like things like, but and sorry, yeah, that's true, yeah, and I really love myself, and I know I can do this thing because I just did this other thing that last week, you know, just anything that comes,
or even though, maybe, or like, yeah, I feel like even though is one, like I feel this way about myself, or right, just a positive current about it. So yeah, so I was guided to do this process with this trigger about just my mistakes, and just feeling like I'm under a microscope, feeling scrutinized, feeling and I ended up uncovering a lot of deeper things that I want to talk about, or like the things that I was saying. Mm-hmm. So of course, I mean, I knew that it was this one thing about the tutoring, but of course I knew that it wasn't the tutoring it wasn't this lady saying this one line in a text that was the issue. I knew it was that my history, and I have such a history with this, specifically with me in academia. And so immediately as I'm doing the tapping, I'm being brought extremely vividly to a few core traumatic memories for me in one of my advisor's offices. I had this advisor in like my second and third year of grad school, who she was just very condescending to me, and it was like a whole thing. She really left some scars there. And there were a few moments that live rent-free in my head forever that are core memories for me of being in her office and her saying really specific things to me, things of like making these faces at me, like for not understanding something, things like being so surprised that I didn't understand something, things like there was one of them where she was like assuming, there was one of them that was like, she was talking about this document about like the Hubble Space Telescope. I was working with like Hubble Space Telescope data on her project, and she had sent this document all about that gave more information about like the instruments on Hubble. And at some point it came up during a meeting. I would like shake in my boots before I went into a meeting with her. It was like one of those things. And there was,
I know the feeling.
and there was one time where she talked about, it was like she mentioned this document that had all this information about the Hubble instrument and about the cameras on there or something. And she like had me pull it up, and she said something like, "Have you ever looked at this?" And something like that completely like insinuated how much of a piece of shit and I was. And I was like, holy shit. And it was so like, just, yeah. So all of these memories in her office specifically, these are what were coming up, these moments.
Wow.
And I was feeling them, and I was crying so much. Like I was putting myself back in those moments, and I was feeling it all times 200%. I was feeling everything. And I would, in the tapping, I was saying like, it made me feel like this. Like it made me feel like she thought I was stupid. It made me feel like this. And so that's kind of what I kept. That was helpful to me to keep, because I was trying to go deep, and I was just trying to really unravel the depth of the depth of how all of these things made me feel. And so I was crying. I was really feeling, and I don't like, it's like I've done a lot of shadow work on this and this specific experience with this advisor, because I have issues with authority figures. I actually tended to have the two main issues that I had in grad school actually tended to be with female authority figures. I've actually never really had issues with male authority figures, but it's just interesting. And so anyway, I've done a lot of shadow work on this. I think clearly my perspective on this is that there was another layer of this that was ready to be released, because it had been a while since especially because I have been out of my PhD for over a year now. And when I got out of that, it was like this liberation, like they can't stop me anymore, like they can't yell at me anymore. And I had been basking in that for the last year and a half. And so I really it's been part of my mental process, or just part of my like liberation and freedom, and like, kind of wanting to, I don't know, just being like, they can't yell at me anymore. Like, they can't make me feel less than anymore. Like they don't have power over me anymore. I got my PhD, suck it. And
yeah, well, it probably just felt like this freedom too, where it's just like, there's also no one that you're answering to.
Exactly.
Like, cause it's like, you're doing tests under these people, and you're handing in assignments, and it's like, you have to answer to them in a sense. Right. Yeah. And it feels, yeah,
exactly. So it had been a while since I had, because that wasn't a trigger for me. That hasn't been a trigger for me for the last over a year. So it had been a while since I had needed to go back to that core wound in shadow work and revisit it and feel it again. And I really felt it again, and I felt the depths of it, and I was doing a lot of crying and everything. And so one of the things that I thought was interesting that I kind of got to the bottom of, like, that's a thing when you're talking this out and you're saying it out, and you're giving yourself the opportunity to just, and I'm closing my eyes the whole time, and I'm just really going into how I feel. And every line I said is, it makes me feel like this, or it makes me, I was doing it in the present, like, it makes me feel like this. And so then I'm talking about the mistakes, and I end up getting to this core, like, aspect of it, which is about trust and about other people trusting me. And so, so I'm tapping on the mistakes, and it's about my mistakes, but it's about, so I start saying, it makes me feel like they're never going to trust me again. And I said, it makes me feel like I don't know how to ever get their trust back again. It makes me feel like there's nothing I can do to ever get to ever gain their trust back again. And all of this really deep core, deep stuff about like trust and and mistakes causing people to lose their faith in you and lose their trust in you, and this deep frustration of like of that's permanent, like how can I ever get their trust back because of this mistake that I made, and like all of this stuff. And it's not even like necessarily like that had to be rectified in terms of like how am I supposed to win their trust back. Now when I'm looking back at the tapping that I did and all the energy that I moved in that, I really feel like it was actually just more about me declaring that, because I was just going really deep into the thought and expressing it, like just getting like going under these layers of like feeling that like helplessness, feeling that like I'm so helpless. I feel so helpless because I'm never going to be able to get their trust back again, and there's nothing I can do. And it was just feeling that and acknowledging that, because there's nothing that I said on the other side of it that's like, this is how, to an extent, because the rectification of that, or like the converse of that, is that my trust in my trust comes from myself, and like my confidence and everything comes from myself. But just about like that piece, that was, it felt like a surprise to me to have that come out. I don't know, maybe it was less conscious, and it just all about this mistake stuff, and just saying things like, it makes me feel like I'm stupid, it makes me feel like I can't do anything right, it makes me feel like all these things. But I really feel like I illuminated a new part of it that just really needed to be seen and felt, obviously, and talked through. And then in the positive current half of it, I really just kind of enforced that my confidence and my abilities and everything comes from within. And I was, there's other things that I was saying, but I was just enforcing, like, that was the thought that I just had in terms of like, there's not necessarily a thought that's going to fix the fact that there's something I'm supposed to do to earn their trust back. We make mistakes in life, or we make silly mistakes on a research project, or we make these mistakes in life, and then you learn from them, or you just continue. But it's like, that's where this deep frustration comes from, and this is like a really deep thing for me in this lifetime, like, because I've also had that energy too of, I felt like that followed me in grad school, and I felt like years later I felt like other things happened down the line that were a reflection of how badly things went with this advisor or my previous mistakes. And it brought up this energy again of, is this never going to stop following me? Like, I thought that I have proved myself, this energy of proving yourself, right? I thought that I've proved myself, and it's like, these things, I think these things is this going to be held against me for the rest of my life? And it's just so, like, it's very deep. And I think it's just like, I think I don't think there's necessarily like a logical through way of that to fix that thought, because that's not how it works. Like, you're not supposed to do something, you're not supposed to create an action that then proves yourself to undo this previous thing. Like, that's not how it works. Things kind of just keep moving, and you end up developing your own internal compass and your own, like, the way that I see it is like this constant toroidal flow, where you are your own source of confidence and you're your own source of self-trust. And then that builds this kind of confident shield around you. And that's what I ended up doing in this second half of the tapping. And I reinforced and I did like a little bit of like a healing too on myself, or just like an energetic like sealing up of my aura. So I just like energetically sealed up my aura and closed up any holes that were in it, and I enforced that from this moment forward, my confidence only comes from within, and that all of my belief in my abilities to tutor, to do whatever, only comes from within. And I said, from this moment forward, if there any feedback that can be acted on, because that's a thing, like there's some things that you maybe can act on, or can, this is I'm needing to learn the nuance of feedback and criticism, right? Because immediately I'm just like, well, I'm gonna go die now. Okay, thanks for the feedback, bye. It's like I'm needing to learn the nuance of how to implement what you can implement. And I kind of just set this intention, like, okay, from this moment forward, if there's any feedback that I can take and implement, I will do that, but anything else I will let roll off my back. And from this moment, no external factors, no text feedback from a parent of tutoring or any otherwise is going to penetrate this strong aura of mine that I've sealed up. And like everything is only coming from within.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, and it's nervous system stuff too, right? Because it's just like, the feedback or the whatever just made your nervous system immediately go into fight or flight because of your past trauma. Yes. So like now, how do you regulate your nervous system so that you can actually receive that feedback? And like you said, filter it out into, okay, this is useful and this is what I can improve on. And this part isn't really useful, so I can discard that moving forward.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Right, because it's all being filtered through our nervous system. So it's like when that initial trigger hits, it just everything comes up, and then I'm training my nervous system to process it in different ways where where whatever is not actually useful, or whatever feels like a personal dig, or whatever feels in some kind of way, I can now kind of filter around and remind myself and be firm in my own energy that that doesn't need to change how I feel about my abilities. And all that stuff. And so I did that for a while, did the tapping, and then after I actually had a nosebleed. And I never get nosebleeds ever. Like really rarely I had a nosebleed.
It was a big release for you for sure. I think this is a really interesting example too, because this goes to show how like your external reality really does mirror your internal world. Like this is such a good example of this, because it's like you were having these feelings, or this underlying whatever you were feeling from this trauma with your advisor that's happened like years and years ago now. But there was still pieces of that had programming about how you felt about yourself, and it was attached. So it's also so interesting that like, right, this situation, you were tutoring a high school kid, and then when you started doing the tapping, like look where it brought you back to. Like it's so interesting that you got brought back to that. And you were also brought back to that because you allowed yourself the time and space to sit in it and be like, I'm gonna, instead of running away from this problem, from this trigger, from this uncomfortable feeling, I'm actually going to choose to go into this deeper and see where it takes you. And that's where it took you. So, I mean, that's a very good prime example of shadow work and how to do it. And I think there's also this piece of like, sometimes we know like, oh yeah, that fucked me up a little bit. Or yeah, I might have trauma from this. And it's like, we're aware of it, but there's also like a level of we haven't really gone into it yet. And I'm not saying that like that did or did not happen for you, but just kind of like an example, or maybe we scratch the surface and it's like, oh yeah, I'm aware that like did something to me, but you haven't actually like really gone into it to feel of what it came up. Cause you had even kind of said you were surprised about some of the stuff that was coming up.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
And like, it's also that example of, we have to feel to let go. We have to feel to release. Because if we have an awareness of something going on in the background, oh yeah, I know that this is in my body, or I have a trauma from this, but we don't like actually go into it. We just kind of hold it there. Then that continues to be the story and the programming that's in us. But when we take a second to actually feel the feelings, not like identify it and hold it over here, but to actually feel it, it's quite interesting how quickly you actually move through being able to let something go. Because
exactly. Yeah, that's why I say the stuff about like there wasn't a logical remedy to any of this other than just enforcing that my beliefs in myself come from within, enforcing that. But in terms of the things that I uncovered or these fears, like, yes, this was just a prime example of, and I have felt these things before, but as always, sometimes there's deeper layers and there's deeper initiations. You know, I'm going to move now I'm getting ready to move into another phase of life where, sure, I will be met with more criticisms again or more feedback. And I needed to, before I entered that stage, I needed to kind of peel back this next layer. And I just needed to feel all these things. And it was so apparent that it was just, there was so much to feel from these core memories that felt traumatic to me.
It's just so interesting how like that was still there for you. And like you said, so first of all, like in general, you weren't putting yourselves in situations to have that feedback. And then so as soon as you did, right away, it's like, this is something that's still in you. This is something you're still dealing with. So like, look at this, like pay attention. And it was very brave of you to go into that instead of being like, I don't want to ever do tutoring again. This mother did this to me or whatever. And then to really go in there and be like, this is a core wound of mine. And this is what it's stemming from, because this, and then, I love these examples of shadow work and how it actually works, because this is such a good example of doing the shadow work and how integrating your shadow and finding those little pieces of gold within it, because our shadows are teachers. Like, they're teaching us. Like, this moment was a huge teaching moment for you and an opportunity to let go of that old story and redefine it. And that came from the shadow. That didn't come from something external. That didn't come from, I'm just going to say I love myself, but I don't actually believe it. Like, I'm just kind of referring to like toxic positivity, although I think being positive is good, but there is a place where sometimes toxic positivity happens where I'm just like saying this, but you know, this came from a place of like, this is my shadow. I'm actually going to sit with my shadow. I'm going to feel my shadow. And then that did turn into, you integrated that piece of you, you embraced that shadow aspect of yourself, and you turned that into really pieces of gold, because then the wisdom that came from that was this beautiful tutorial field that you talked about, which I really liked that image of how, no, my trust and my confidence comes from within, and that's the belief, and that's the energy that I'm getting from this. Yeah,
and it's a self-sustaining system. It's moving. It's constantly moving, and I'm fueling it. So we fuel our own, you know, it's constantly moving through us. We're fueling our own confidence and our own self-worth and belief in ourselves. And it is kind of just crazy how it came up right away. Like, literally within that, actually might have been like the first week that I started tutoring. Like, instantly it came up. And just what's so funny about this specific thing that triggered it, like, I didn't even tutor this person again. Like, the specific thing. And I was like slightly triggered in the beginning of the week by one other thing, but I had kind of equilibrated out of that at that point. I was actually doing okay at that point. I like took it in, and the way that I processed the other trigger kind of was just reinforcing that, like, it was actually more so just about being proud of myself that I'm actually putting myself in this position again, whereas it's coming out of this long period of contrast where I was hiding away, playing safe for months and months and months, because I didn't even want to do the work to potentially get the criticism. I didn't even want to take one step forward. So I was just like enforcing it. After the first trigger, I was just like, you know what, like, I'm just going to be proud of myself that, like, I know this is something that could come with the territory, and I'm just going to be proud of myself that I'm moving in life. I'm doing something. But so this it really like, it was just so crazy too, because like that morning was completely fine. Like I was completely fine. Like I wasn't even like, I didn't even think the session, I didn't even feel weird after after that 2 hour, it was like the 2 hours Zoom session was on a Thursday night and this was Friday morning. I didn't even feel weird about that one little mistake I made, or even that weird about how we didn't have a Zoom camera on. I helped the kid too. Like that's the thing. Like that session it really actually went very well. Like I really helped him a lot, and we really worked through a lot of things, and we ironed out a lot of kinks in his understanding. And so I felt good about that. I was like, I really helped that kid. And then I was like completely fine the next morning. And then this one text comes through and it just blows up everything, and it just ignites this whole healing. And then I don't even freaking see the family again. I don't think I'm gonna work with them again. They haven't heard from them, or the middleman person hasn't contacted me about them. So this one little, it just flew in like a little speck, and it's just like bing, igniting this healing, igniting this process in me, and then it just flies away. I'm just like, but it's great.
Also, I think the patterning piece of this is interesting, because this goes to kind of show how like these things work in cycles, and the cycle will continue to happen until you break it. And that is true for so many things in our life, right? Like so many, I think a lot of us can relate to this if it's in ourselves or we see it in others, of being caught in like a pattern and a cycle. And so for you, it's like, if you chose to avoid that, and just as an example, and maybe like numb out and not actually go into the depths of it or into that opportunity, then the next person you would have tutored, like it would continue to show up in your field. Yeah. So it's also very interesting how you said that you haven't tutored this person again, because once we also take, sacred like radical responsibility for our internal world, which reflects our external world. And then we go into whatever that is to, find those pieces of gold, or to really lean into that medicine that is our own medicine, that our own spirit, souls is creating for us. Then we have that key to like break that pattern and move through that. And then when we choose to avoid that, which is okay, we all have our moments, but just when you choose to avoid or self-sabotage, that's where people get stuck in these patterns and cycles that continue on and on and on. And I mean, we're humans. We've been programmed to be in these patterns and cycles that do not serve us. Like I don't think there's any humans out there who haven't dealt with that, because like we've been programmed to be into that. But there's also a key, there's an antidote to break those cycles and to break those patterns that don't serve us. And thank you for sharing, because I think this was a very beautiful example of how to do that, and also what, shadow work looks like real time, and integrating the shadow, embracing the shadow, and finding the gift out of like our own shadows, and allowing it to be our medicine.
And I also want to say that immediately after this tapping, I felt so much better. And I felt like I genuinely could say, because you know how sometimes there's a difference of like, after you cry something out, you're like, yeah, like I feel better, I guess. Or like, I don't, like sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. Like because tapping is such a, it's a true nervous system. Like you're doing real things in there because of the specific points that you're tapping. And like I said, I had a nosebleed. Like I moved energy, and also I did tons of crying and purging and feeling and going back to the moment and feeling. And I genuinely can say that after this, like that text from that woman in the morning did not bother me at all. I felt no charge. And I genuinely could say that, because I know there's times where it's like, oh, I feel a little better, like, maybe, like, sure, like, but this time I was like, oh my God, I felt like I walked through a portal. It was crazy.
Wow. And I mean, and that just tapping is a very potent, powerful modality. It is very powerful medicine. I think especially coupling it with this shadow work piece, but also when you're talking about like the charge piece, that's interesting too, because it's like, that goes to show how everything really is neutral. and we're the ones that charge it, you know, with like our triggers and put the positive or the negative or whatever on it. Because once you're able to move that, and that just became like a neutral point for you. It didn't become something negative and triggering.
Yeah. Yes.
And how like,
exactly.
yeah. And how our triggers just mirror our internal world. And I mean, and it's also okay if you don't understand what the trigger is showing you at that time. Like when I was like earlier talking about my medical stuff, like I don't know right now what it's completely showing me, but at least like I have the awareness of like, okay, there is more for me in this. But yeah, just for those out there that are doing this work or tapping into shadow work or going deeper, that if you don't know, that's okay too. And like just the awareness is a really beautiful like starting point for that to deepen.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Definitely.
for the tapping, so it's like EFT, which stands for emotional freedom technique. And so there's the speaking part of it. And also, I guess, just like think of how powerful that sounds, like emotional freedom technique, right? Like
I
who
never
doesn't
knew that's
want,
what EFT stood for.
yeah, emotional freedom technique.
I thought it was the T was for tapping.
No.
What? Learn something new every day.
Yeah.
Emotional freedom technique. That's what it means?
Emotional freedom technique.
Yo, that's
So
badass.
you're telling me that like I can liberate myself emotionally from tapping on my body? Like, I think this is a no-brainer. And firsthand for me, yeah, like I think I did 2-hour-long sessions this week, and I don't think there's ever a time that I've sat and tapped that I feel the same or worse at the end. So from my personal experience, I do think it is a very powerful modality. Someone that I think is like the real deal and is really good at this, her name is Sonia with the World Tapping Center. So if people that are listening do want to go deeper with tapping or learning how to do it, I would look up Sonia or like the World Tapping Center. She does have a membership that you can subscribe to, which I don't think is very much, that has this huge library of all these different taps. So there's different types of taps, you know, like maybe I'm feeling disappointed tap, abundance tap, new beginnings tap, et cetera, et cetera. But she also has a YouTube page where she does have some free taps on there. So that's also a really good way, if you don't want to do the membership or whatever, to just kind of see what it's like. And there's other people out there who do EFT too. I just know from my experience, I really like her, and I really think she's she's the real deal when it comes to this. So if people who are interested in learning more about like the EFT, I would definitely like look her up. But it is it's definitely very powerful. It's something that I've been using with my clients, and it's something that I desire to go in deeper with myself as well.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think the reason obviously that it is so effective is because, well, I mean, I guess like all shadow work kind of brings you through, but tapping, it brings you through the mud of the problem. Like you have to go through the negative first half of the negative current of unraveling. Well, so not only do you have to feel everything, like I said, if that's what comes up, or you can have unexpected emotions or unexpected things that you're realizing come up. Definitely another time that I tapped, I think about like being cheated on, like a lot of things just that's what happens when you give yourself the space. It's giving yourself space to talk it out. But yeah, you have to go through that. You have to go through the feelings and everything, and it just kind of, and because it's so effective, kind of just goes to show like that's what is effective, the feeling it.
Well, and it's the physical release from the body too, because as we know, we store trauma and keep that in our body. So when you're tapping, like you're moving energy, like you're like literally like moving the energy and tapping it, so as a release point to like leave your body. So yeah, so when you first start doing it, it's like not abnormal to feel like really tired and stuff at the end, because like you've just like moved so much and released so much that your body's like not used to. And then just like anything else, like that's how I felt when I started practicing yoga too, really tired all the time until like my body got used to it, because that's also a form of release with all the stretching. But yeah, it's like a physical. Yeah.
I was going to say that later in that day, I took like a 3-hour nap.
Yeah, for sure. You would have.
Because And I didn't feel the tiredness immediately. Like immediately I felt fine. And then later in the day, like in the middle of the day, out of nowhere, because I did this in the morning, in the middle of the day, out of nowhere, just like the exhaustion, the emotional exhaustion, like everything, it just came over me. And I did take a nap. I did take a long nap later that day. So,
and it's also great. Like that's your body, like resting, like recovering, like that restoration period, like resetting also, like when our bodies sleep a lot of the time, it's because it is this kind of like resetting that's happening of like us actually like shutting down. So that's like actually very productive after something like that.
No, exactly. I was like, I did a lot of work today. Like that was one of my most I felt so accomplished that day. I was like, I really did something today. I really like got some work done in the quantum field. I felt good about it.
And I love the piece that you were speaking to about like moving through it or moving through the sludge, or like maybe quote unquote, for lack of a better term, negative in the beginning, then you move into the positive. I feel like that's anyways, for lack of a better term.
Right.
I was thinking about that too when I was tapping, actually, and I was almost comparing it to like a psychedelic experience. And what I mean by that is not that it actually feels psychedelic to do tapping. So if anyone who's thinking about it, it's not like it feels like that, but it felt like the piece of like when I have done psychedelic medicine ceremonies in the beginning, it's like the kind of heavier stuff gets brought up and rattled to the surface for you to like face it head on, which is exactly what you did in the tapping. And then you do kind of move through this part on the other side, just like I felt like I had with the psychedelics, where you kind of like once you kind of move through that, you feel it, you face it head on, you move through it, and then you come to this other side where it's just like, wow, like you've released and you feel lighter, and now we're bringing in the positive like belief systems and we're restructuring that way. And so that's what I very much feel too. And the experiences with sitting with like plant medicine is like once you get through that kind of sludge or that heavier stuff, that the real lessons and stuff, you move through that, and then you just feel like you just feel so happy and light, and like you're reprogramming in positive ways. And and I felt that similarly to a tapping experience, not like actually feeling psychedelic, but like that way of moving through it, through the heavier stuff, and then coming out on the other side and being like, wow, I did that, and I'm happy I did it, and I do feel lighter, and I feel like I let these things go. And
I'm thinking about I'm just kind of thinking about quantum healing, and it's kind of coming to me like these two. I'm thinking about quantum healing, and in the way that sometime that you can kind of mentally revisit a timeline or revisit an aspect of yourself, and then visit it as your current self and bring love to it and be the love that wasn't there for it in the moment, and how that's kind of one way of closing a loop. That's one way of closing a loop, and it's both of them are kind of like still acknowledging the feeling and providing some receptive energy to that feeling. In quantum healing, it's in the form of, if you're going back and like being giving the love that wasn't there, so you're closing the loop, you're filling in the gap, and you're bringing unification to that, and how this is kind of like it's kind of just like another form of revisiting the emotion to just like feel it.
Yeah, well, they're
forget what else I was
different
gonna say with
aspects
that,
of it too, because
right.
I mean, you can branch off in different ways. I mean, there's so many different branches of just shadow work in general,
Yeah.
and then even
So
how
we
you
could do
want to
whatever you
use
want.
it. So like the EFT, it's like during like each EFT session is unique and might bring you to different places too. So for you, it brought you back to that certain point, but a lot of the times when it is taking us back to these certain points, it's also an opportunity to do inner child healing, which is an aspect of shadow work. And that's what happened with you. If it was inner child, if it was inner young adult, like whatever, like you're going back to a certain time. And then you do have the opportunity to, like you said, give yourself that love, or put that love in there, or change the story. Because this is another interesting thing that I've been speaking of, because there is a piece of like, stop telling the same story, you know? And I do believe that. I know Lucia talks about this a lot, of like, stop telling that, because that kind of perpetuates the cycle of this happened to me, or this of what it is. Although I do believe there's parts where you do need to go back into it and feel it to heal it. And then once it's healed, like you stop talking about it.
Yeah.
Shit, there was somewhere that I was going with that. Ah, fuck.
It's okay. I mean, that's still kind of a complete thought about the story thing.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, it's a complete
good to,
thought. It's a completely incomplete thought. So that might have to be taken out if I can't figure out what the end of that was, because else it doesn't really make any sense. But there was somewhere that I was going with that.
If you want, you can take a moment to see if it comes back.
Yeah. Well, just I think that, like, you know, on the podcast we tell our stories. I think it's about rewriting your story. So it's like when you keep telling the old story of what happened to you, you keep perpetuating that in your mind, that you're a victim as an example, or you keep perpetuating this old story. So that is your story. When in the shadow work, when we have this opportunity, like you said, to go back and put love in it, that's changing the story. So we go back to that point in time. And okay, so we can also extract the pieces of wisdom, you know, the pieces of sludge, and turn it into our gold, or extract the pieces of gold from the shadow, or however you want to look at it. Or we go back to our inner child and say, what do you need from me right now? And, you know, and then really go into that, which can really branch off too. But overall, so your inner child needs love, or now you get to inject love into that story at that point, changing that story moving forward. So once you put love into that story is not the same. That story has been changed. That's a healed timeline. And so at that point, now you stop talking about the past and you start talking in the healed, embodied version of that story, of that timeline of who you are.
Mic drop moment right there. That was good.
Yeah. So that's important.
That's awesome.
And then for us, and I always think that's interesting, because like for us with the podcast, like we talk, like that's what a podcast is talking. But I think, I think it's very cool though, how we can go in to these stories, and it can be the story, and then we get to change it. And it's because sometimes part of your process is talking it out, but then it's like it's actually going into that piece and listening or whatever it is, you know, like listening to your inner child, listening to that piece of you, opening yourself up to move through it, to let go, to release whatever that is. Because we see this too when we go back to the pattern thing. Like, you know, sometimes we have those people in our life, or those people that we know, that it's always the same story, you know, like they Every time, like every relationship they have, it's the same story over and over again. Every it's the same story. This happened, this happened, this happened. Why me? Like, I mean, and everyone's process is their own process, but that's just like a clear example we see in them, how they keep repeating the patterns because they don't change the story. They believe that story that they've been telling themselves. Oh, I got cheated on when I was 14, so I believe now that I don't deserve love, and I believe that every person will cheat on me. Well, guess what? Every 10 boyfriends after that, they've all cheated on them because that's their internal world that is reflecting that. So I just want everyone to know that, first of all, we have the power to change the story. And once you go in there and change it to be your healed, embodied state, then stop talking about the old story. And like now it's the healed story, you know? It's like, and we can, I think both can exist, where it can be like, you can explain something, but then also hold the healed, embodied state of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this is really good stuff with the stories and everything. Yeah, this is awesome. Really good shadow work talk and tapping stuff. So yeah, if you are feeling, especially like, if you're having a trigger come up, like, I think, at least for me, I mean, yeah, maybe you could plan tapping, but I feel like sometimes maybe it's best when it's a spur of the moment, or you just like, you know, sometimes things come up and you're like, that's how this one came up for me. It was like, this came up and I could feel it bubbling, something like was needing to come out, and it was something that I could talk about, and it was just like, you know, sometimes the moment presents itself, and if the moment presents itself and you can just lean into it and maybe see if you can sit down, do some tapping, and especially if it's something you just, you never know what you can uncover, what energy you can move, and like that's the thing, like if your nervous system is reacting in that way, like clearly something's ready to come up and to come out. Yeah. And lean into it. And I'm glad I did with that recent tapping. And you can really correct these things. That sounds weird, but yeah, you could really rewrite the story. You know, you're rewriting the story. You're moving energy in a way that's really altering your field and altering it. It's putting you on a different timeline. It's altering the course of your reality after you do something like that for real.
Yeah. So, and then what I'd like to say too is, for people that are maybe just starting out on their healing journeys and they feel maybe overwhelmed, like, it always gets easier. The beginning is usually the hardest part, when you open yourself up to actually feel again and to let go of the numbness. But then it always gets easier. It gets easier and gets easier, and it gets easier and it gets easier. And we always have the power to choose, right? We have the power to choose if we do want to heal and rewrite our stories, and if we don't. And if we don't, that's okay. Like, we always have the choice, but it comes back down to us choosing what we desire moving forward. But also, if you are just beginning your healing journey and, you know, want to get into this, but you're a little bit worried, it's like it gets easier and easier.
Yep. It does. Yeah, that's a good point about if you're just starting. Okay. I feel complete. You want to wrap there? Okay. Well, thank you for listening, and we appreciate anyone and everyone that's here for the journey and for this moment of the podcast and that's listening. And please be sure to tell your spiritual friend about this podcast, because you probably have at least one. And if you're enjoying this, thank you. Please follow me on Instagram at interdimensional.astrophysics, and also follow the podcast at the Orphic Podcast.
You can find me on Instagram at Mariposa Moonchild. I'll also say, please follow our YouTube at the Orphic Podcast. We have a TikTok now at the Orphic Podcast. Basically, it's the Orphic Podcast on all platforms. We don't have a Twitter, but everything else besides that. And also please leave us a rating and review on Apple or Spotify, or both would be awesome. It really, really helps us grow and expand and reach the right people. And it's also that, we're talking about feedback today, that feedback piece to know if we're like, if it's hitting, if it's landing with the people, if you're listening and if you appreciate it, letting us know really, really helps us out. So thank you. And thank you so much for being here and for listening to us. We really, really appreciate and love every single soul that's here.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, and see you next time.
Bye.